Oh, then. So today we got something a little different. Still going to be gameplay, so don't worry about that one. But I've pre-recorded some games using the list I used a couple of videos ago. I'll link the original one if you're looking for like a guide on it, and more like analytical kind of gameplay where I'm explaining what I'm doing a bit more. But I really just want to talk about the state of the game and stuff. So with me rambling on, if you just want to see more games with this deck, just mute it and you can still watch that, and that won't be a problem. So I don't want to keep the intro too long because I'm going to be talking for a while. Um, as always, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe if you want to see more content. That really helps me out, and I'll get straight into my rambles. Alright, so I think if you watch like other content creators for Gwent and like for the pro scene, that sort of thing, you're probably aware that like a lot of people have been facing a lot of like burnout with the game and have a lot of issues with how it's operating at the moment. And I kind of agree with some of it not so much. So I kind of wanted to talk about where the game's at the moment and kind of have it so that people who aren't playing the game, maybe looking to pick it up, can get a bit of an insight. And if you've already played it, just me give you a few of my thoughts and see what you think about it. I obviously do want to preface this before anyone questions whether I'm biased or not. Obviously, I'm a Gwent partner, but I don't receive any money from CDPR or anything like that. It's mainly more like a support kind of thing from them. So these are like my genuine opinions. None of it's biased in any way. This is just how I feel about the game. Just so I can get that one out of the way. But I mean, I'll start with the good stuff. The meta at the moment's like in a pretty much solved state, so most of the best decks have pretty much been figured out. There's not too much in the way of like innovation from the very top end of people. Obviously, people still try homebrews, and that's to be expected. But in terms of what the meta decks are, they're pretty much figured out at the moment. And despite there being some imbalances that I will talk about in a bit. In general, the balance for the majority of cards is in a pretty good state, and we kind of see that with how diverse the meta is. Obviously, Syndicate's not in too good of a spot, but for the other factions, there's very competitive options for arguably 5 out of the 6 factions, which for CCG is pretty good. If you consider other games, a lot of the time you just see a specific like race, faction, whatever, typically can't compete. Whereas there's one or two that can, and really in this, the scoia'tael you have like movement and unitless are 2 options. Skellige has Blaze of Glory, and it has Warriors, and it has Lippy. Monsters, I mean, Vi is still somewhat usable, probably not the best choice, but you got, Arrakis Swarm and Kelly. Nilfgaard have a ton of options at the moment, with the imbalance on Mentor, but, you can go double Madoc, you can go for Ball with either Lockdown or Double Cross. The Cyrenova list is still fine, with Colgrim, like a Cloggers list. And which other faction? And NR, obviously Shield Wall is still very good, and of course you've got Witches. And I feel like I probably missed another faction, but you get my point. But there's still plenty of decks that can compete at the top end, which is usually a sign that balance is in a decent enough spot. Obviously, as I say, I'll speak about some of the other balance stuff that I don't agree with, but yeah, in general, the game's in a pretty good spot. One of the more sort of general things about the game is I really like the setup compared to other CCGs, and that's kind of the reason why the game got me in the first place and why I'm still playing it now. Is it's very kind of unique among other CCGs because the vast majority of CCGs just operate on you have a health pool, your opponent has a health pool, you knock theirs down to 0 before yours gets knocked down to 0. And like boards interacting in case of like units or minions or whatever you want to call them, fighting, however you want to do that. Whereas Gwent doesn't really operate on that. I mean, sure, you have the sort of turn by turn thing, but you don't have a mana system. and it's more about developing points, and also with the round mechanic in that you can't just commit everything in round one, win that round, because then you've just lost it in the later rounds. So that focus on resources is really, really nice. Initially, when I started thinking there's no mana sort of system, my first thought was, can you just play your best cards straight away? But with the round system, it basically means if you want to do that, you can. You'll win round one, but you're not going to win your later rounds and you'll lose the game. So I think it's a very interesting sort of approach to take, and it really does like incentivize resource management far better than any other CCG's ever been able to do. You look at like Hearthstone, and with their mana system, any sort of cards that can manipulate that are just exploited. With Magic, you always have the issue of just bricking on lands or bricking on spells to play, and Gwent kind of plays around that by just saying, yeah, you can play what you want, but there's drawbacks to you playing what you want when you want. So really like the setup. So another thing that's actually really good, especially like this is an important one if you're looking to sort of start the game. If you're somebody watching this, considering if you want to play the game, it's very, very fair to free-to-play players. Rewards are like incredibly generous, and you never really feel the need to like buy crates for cards or anything like that. You know, if you compare it to like Magic, MTGA Arena, or Hearthstone, for example, where if you don't put money in, you just have to accept you can grind for like one meta deck, but flexibility isn't an option. So like for context, I've been playing for about a year now, and you know I think I'm missing like 3 cards now or something, and I bought one expansion. I didn't buy the most recent one, but I have all the cards from that. You know, it's very. I don't think there's another game where you can play as regularly as I do and have everything, and when a new expansion rolls around, be ready to buy everything you need. And that's especially true if you get the journey. I know some people don't really like battle pass systems, and in general I don't, but Gwent is the only one I will basically buy because it's, if I remember right, it's like £8 here in good old Blighty, but that's for like every 3 months. So I mean, considering how much I play it, like paying a bit over £2 for the amount of stuff you get from the journey is well worth it. And even if you don't get the journey, you still like on the free sort of track rewards are still pretty good. You still get plenty of stuff, and with the like reward point system, you just end up with a ton of resources. And you'll kind of see this with people who've been playing from beta. If you ever see, you know, someone who's been playing from beta and have a look at their resources at the top, they literally have like hundreds of thousands of scraps left. You know, they can just craft whatever they want when they want, and I think that's a good sign. I think they've struck a very good balance, because people are still gonna, you know, buy crates if they want to try and get premiums, that sort of thing, but it doesn't AWOL you out of the meta, for example, so you can just operate in, and it gives everybody the opportunity. It's not just a buying wins kind of game, which it can become like that if you make it too steep for free-to-play players. And so the last good thing before we get into the criticism kind of stuff is I've found the like company side support's pretty good. Obviously I'm like a partner, so I do kind of have more like direct lines of contact, I guess, if I had any problems or anything. But I've typically found that, you know, if you have a problem, it's very easy to reach out to someone, and they're pretty good in terms of dealing with your issues, sorting things out, very sort of easy to talk to, that sort of thing, and that always really helps, because, you know, it's inevitable that things are gonna go wrong at some point, especially like on this side, like content creation kind of stuff. Things just go wrong, and it's always really nice that you can actually get a hold of someone, because it's like games before where you just kind of try and get in touch with someone and it's just a brick wall. don't get anything back. So that's always really good. It does genuinely feel like they actually, want the game to do pretty well. So that's always a nice thing. So that's enough. That's enough arse licking. Now we get onto the rant stuff. So as I kind of mentioned in the beginning with balance, although most cards are in a good balance position, there are cards that are in a really bad place, and it keeps happening quite regularly that cards kind of slip through the cracks, and go live in a state where it's like signed off on this. Vi being a perfect example when it came out, sure, when the meta solved a bit, it was not as impactful once people figured it out, but it was way too strong, way too strong. And of course, at the moment, I know that this is probably because of like the CDPR hack. I have heard that mentors weren't meant to go live in the state they were, so they've got Adrenaline 3 now, and that's just an insane change to make. And supposedly that wasn't meant to go live, and if so, benefit of the doubt, whatever. But this isn't the first time that stuff's gone live, and it's like this is busted. Like we even have like Skellige Warriors when they came out, that was just ridiculous. The win rates were back in the mid 60% rate, which just you can't have decks that operate like that. If at every single skill level decks are getting over 60% win rate, they're not in a good place, and you have to question how thoroughly they're being tested, really. And so that's mainly my concern, is like it happens quite regularly that stuff comes out and it's really broken. So I really think that needs, I don't know whether it's a case of like more frequent testing of cards or more frequent balance patches. I'm not too sure how that's fixed, but at the end of the day, you can't be putting cards out live that are just in the sort of state that we've seen some of the cards go out. It's just insane. And so next sort of complaint, I've got a whole list here, is like most games feel like they're decided in the deck builder. So kind of what I mean by this is like it's becoming almost like rock, paper, scissors, in the matchups are really polarized, in that when you queue up with a deck, if you run into a matchup where you're just not favoured, short of them making a terrible misplay or you playing out of your mind, you're just not going to win. And that obviously doesn't feel too good. You want your game to be decided by skill. Obviously, there is always going to be that deck builder factor, but the degree that it's impactful at the moment is just too much. It basically becomes like you are just rolling the dice when you queue up. You pick your deck, you go into a game, and you get a good matchup, and oh great, I've got a win, and then you roll again, this oh great, I've got a loss, and it plays out like that. And at that point, it's basically just gambling, isn't it? You're just hoping that you queue into a deck that you either counter or have at least a favourable matchup. As I say, that's always going to be present to some degree. Some decks are just better against other decks. That's how CCGs work, but it's become very polarized in Gwent, and I don't even know what the solution here is, in all honesty. I feel like some cards just operate as that, like, this shutdown for opponent, absolutely shut down. I feel like a lot of the mid-range kind of decks have access to control tools that are quite simply too strong for mid-range to have access to. Really need to be reserved for control heavy. So like Take V and like Morkvarg are perfect examples of that. Very good control tools, but they slot very nicely into mid-range list. And yeah, that sometimes, well, I say sometimes, most of the time, raises issues. Another kind of one is like the polarization of provisions. So what I mean by that is like the bottom end bronzes are, pretty lackluster, whereas like top end golds are like insanely good. And I mean, you're always going to see this. This is always going to happen, where your top end cards are better than your bottom end cards. But when it is this polarizing, it makes drawing the most painful experience. This has been like alleviated a bit because there's been a lot more tutors kind of added to the game, or like tweaked to be a bit more viable. which helps with like draws and things like that. But you know, it hurts, man, when you get into a round 3 and you just draw. You've got your best cards sat in your deck, and you just draw your 4 provision cards. And this is like kind of, you're always going to have that in CCGs because of how drawing works. But because Gwent operates in a way that you at max are going to be playing, like if someone played like a matter or something, I don't know. If you ignore like drawing extra card mechanics, you're going to play 16 cards in a game. And so that means there's going to be 9 cards you don't play. And that situation can arise where, out of those 9 cards you don't play, like 4 of them are the best cards that you just don't draw into. Now, in any other CCG, you have ways to work around that. You play a deck that kind of stalls and you're waiting to get to those top cards, and when you finally draw them, you can play them, you get your value. It's a little annoying that you missed them, but it's whatever, you still get to use them. However, in Gwent, if you miss your top end card and you don't have a tutor for it, you just don't get to play that game. And if that's part of your game plan, you're done for. And so cards like Squirrel, for example, getting rid of an Aeromancy now makes that even more annoying. And yeah, it feels just kind of gross. I think in general, what probably needs doing is, your 4 provision cards, the lower ends just kind of tweaking a little bit, maybe giving them a bit more power, situational power, if that makes sense, to make it less impactful when you actually miss your top end cards. Or the other option is you bring down the power of the top end cards, try and level out the playing field a little bit. Rather than it being incentivized to just run these cards that are basically garbage in the 4 provision slot to really stack out your deck with the top ends. If you de-incentivize the top end, really make them very situational, which is completely fine. Creating top end cards that are situationally good is fine. But yeah, something needs addressing there for sure. And kind of going on from the huge value of the top ends, scenarios are a major issue because of the value they present, and we kind of see that with the majority of them being viable. So Ball, Find Death, Geddy's sometimes played in SK. The vast majority of Syndicate is going to play Passiflora. Siege doesn't see too much play, but that's it is what it is. Probably one of the worst ones. And Horn is played any Death Wish deck. It's automatically played. And what this kind of presents is it sets up a situation where your opponent has to answer it. They have to answer that. Now with the resource thing, you can hold it until the later rounds. Your decks typically have enough power to fight in the earlier rounds, so you can hold your scenarios till later. And what it sets up is a situation where your opponent has to have an answer, or you are going to get absolutely insane value and probably win the game. And we've kind of seen this again and again and again, and the sort of symptoms rather than the actual root cause are always addressed. So we saw this with Bomb Heaver. Bomb Heaver created a really gross interaction with scenarios where if you drew Bomb Heaver, great. If you didn't, you lost. And so they changed the Bomb Heaver, and all that happened was Karathi basically replaced it. And people are now calling for Karathi to be changed, and at the end of the day, I think it's scenarios that may be the big issue there. Because I think Karathi's actually fine. 10 provisions to remove anything. 10 provisions is very, very steep, and there is going to be matchups where Karathi just plays for nothing. So I think it's in a fair enough spot. But I think the change for scenarios really needs to be making them less powerful, and making them kind of more situational. So if you really want to get the value from them, you need to be investing into what they want to do in effect. So, for example, Masquerade Ball, that needs aristocrats. You just need 2 aristocrats and it goes off. And so what we see is basically a hyper control lockdown list with Masquerade Ball, and you literally run I think 4 or 5 aristocrats or something. So basically the deck at that point isn't an aristocrat deck. It's not working how designed. You're building it for that, you just do it like that. And kind of the same with Find Death, and the same with Horn. to be honest. You just chuck in a couple of cards that will just trigger the scenario, and that's enough. And I mean, I literally did a video using Haunt. You know, I was running next to no Death Wishes, and Haunt was still insane. I wasn't even really focused on Death Wishes, and Haunt was still insane. And yeah, I think that really needs addressing. And that's kind of thing is like a regular expansion. So although I said the meta's good in that it's like quite diverse, it is becoming stale because there's not really been any changes. You know, we haven't had an expansion since Where the Witcher. It's still relatively fresh, but it's going to be quite a while till the next one. And I can appreciate if, you know, they lack the resources to put out more regular expansions, you know, that's fine. But I think then instead you maybe need to be looking at making more regular balance patches, because they can have the effect that an expansion does, and we kind of saw this with the last balance patch. A lot of the changes to like the lockdown, the lock card, sorry, a lot of those have entered the meta, and it switched things up a bit, and just making that more regular because they come like once a month, and sometimes months are just skipped. And really, if it's even if it's fortnightly, that's usually enough. Just more regular balance patches or more expansions, quite simply. Yeah, so that'll do me. I think that's me done. In kind of in conclusion, I still enjoy the game. I'm not burning out by any means. Next season, I am going to be having a bit of a grind. So definitely look out for that. But yeah, I think there's definitely things that need addressing because this comes from a place of like concern in that like I want this game to do well because I enjoy it and it's what I want to stick with. But yeah, issues can very quickly spiral out of control, and if they can be addressed, the game will improve, and that's always a good thing. So yeah, I'll stop rambling. Appreciate you listening to me and actually getting to this point of the video. Very impressive, and I'll catch you in the next one.